Hello and good morning, everyone. We can see the participants are slowly filling up there, so we'll kick off in the next 10 to 15 seconds as everybody jumps in. Thank you all for attending today and welcome. COVID-19 Government Grants Open Forum Q&A. Thanks all for your attendance again. It's obviously a very topical item, and we look forward to giving you some valuable information today. We only decided to hold this webinar just over a week ago. We felt it was important to recap on some of the government grants. It's no doubt an evolving situation, so we're expecting there could be some more announcements coming shortly, given the current circumstances, particularly here in Victoria. So I'm welcomed today by Leigh Maddison. So Leigh's a Senior Manager at Wilson Pateras and has spent over 10 years in accounting and tax, helping clients, particularly clients here in Victoria and SME. So welcome aboard, Leigh.
Thank you, Nick. Great to be here.
Excellent. So today's presentation will go for approximately half an hour to 40 minutes. We've got our chat and Q&A box. So it is a Q&A open forum session. So we do have some prepared information to talk about in relation to grants, but we invite all your questions, so please feel free to ask them all as you go along. We'll do the best we can to answer them throughout the course of the presentation, and we look forward to your feedback at the end, of course. So moving along, I guess today what we'd like to cover are the 4 key government incentives that are currently available to business owners. The last one, in fact, is somewhat available to business owners, but by default, it actually goes directly to employees, and that's the federal government grants. The first 3 there listed are state government initiatives. So we'll cover those today and give you a bit more information about how you might be able to apply and their respective eligibility. So moving along, over to you, Leigh, to talk a bit more about the first one, the Small Business COVID Hardship Fund.
Thanks, Nick. So this is a grant that we've seen quite a bit of interest in since it opened a couple of weeks ago. It was originally $10,000, but the government have increased it now to $14,000. We're expecting a 3 to 4 week processing period between application time and receiving the funds. A lot of the applications that we did when it first opened, we're still seeing them being processed at the moment. So in line with other grants that we've had in the past, about a 3 to 4 week is what we're waiting for at the moment. To be eligible for this, you need to be located in Victoria. It's a Victorian government grant. You need to be able to evidence that as a direct consequence of COVID restrictions since late May, so the 27th of May, that you've experienced a reduction in turnover. That reduction in turnover is based on how you calculate your income for GST purposes. So if your BAS is on a cash basis, it's based on receipts coming in. If you're on an accrual basis, it's based on the invoices that you send out to clients over a 2-week period. Now, that reduction needs to be 70% over that 2-week period compared to the same 2-week period in 2019. So, for instance, if you were comparing the 27th of May 2021 to the 10th of June 2021, you would compare the 27th of May 2019 to the 10th of June 2019. And if that has a 70% drop, then you are potentially eligible. There's a few other criteria that you've got to meet as well, but this is the key one.
So Leigh, what's quite interesting about this comparison period is that it's any 2-week period from that 27th of May to essentially today. So as a client, you can be selecting any 2-week period, which means you've got literally, I guess, dozens or even almost now hundreds of different types of combinations of 2-week periods.
All right. Yeah, you've picked up. It's something that I've noticed quite a bit in the last couple of weeks with applying for these grants is that we've been able to find ones that we didn't necessarily expect, that over the course of the last couple of months, they might have had a decline in turnover. 70% sounds like a massive hurdle. But when you look at discrete 2-week periods and you look at a bad 2-week period in 2021, if you've just had one bad 2-week period and you had a really good 2-week period back in 2019, we're finding a lot of people that are eligible that on the surface thought that they weren't. So I'm finding clients with Xero are probably one of my best friends at the moment, because Xero has a calculator that I can go in, work out a lot of samples, and it'll do the calculations for us automatically. So we can go in, put in a heap of 2-week combinations, and it'll spit out the calculation for me. It's great.
Alternatively, you must be using Excel. So you would export from, if it's a MILE file, export to Excel.
Yeah,
and then try and calculate that way.
Yeah, so MILE is a little bit more work, but it's not too bad. That one, as you suggest, yes, it's going through looking at samples in the GST reports. There's a detail report, so I go through and look through samples and try and find periods that were lower and higher and try and identify them, and then a manual calculation for those ones. So depending on your software, if you're on an online system and your books are up to date, this can be a 15-minute, half an hour sort of exercise, and then for $14,000, it can be quite a good investment of time.
Yep, definitely.
The other eligibility criteria which are important, I'm finding that first one is the most important one that we're dealing with, but there's a few others to look at. You need to have Victorian payroll of up to $10 million. Over $10 million, you're not eligible. This is on an ungrouped basis, so we can, rather than if you're on payroll tax, for example, a lot of you might be grouped. That's not the case for this grant. We can look at each individual entity. So if you've got multiple entities, we can look at it separately.
So that means if you had 3 trading businesses, each trading business could get those grants. So it could then be 3 times 14,000.
Correct. Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. I've had a couple of clients that have had a couple of entities and put in 2 application forms. So it's fairly common with that one as well. Not having payroll doesn't preclude you from being able to apply for this as well. I'll come to that in a second, but it's a payroll up to $10 million. If you're in a business and you're self-employed, but you're not paying yourself a wage, which we see quite often, that doesn't preclude you from being able to go for this grant. You need to have been registered for GST on the 28th of July, 2021. I've seen this with a couple of clients where they haven't been registered yet because they're starting up, or they were a smaller business that haven't been required to be registered up until now, so they haven't registered. Unfortunately, there's been a couple of questions about backdating. So normally when we do registrations, we are able to, for GST, we are able to backdate registrations back to the 1st of July. There is a massive warning from the government on that particular subject. They are data matching back to the ABR records, which is where the GST registrations come from. And they do have that data as to the dates that things were registered and when things have been changed.
I really know that at a federal level, there's been a lot of noise, particularly publicly, around JobKeeper payments and certain businesses, and particularly listed companies and large private businesses who received this and probably in the spirit of the initiative weren't eligible. It would seem that if you're looking to backdate a application, it's always difficult to know for sure, but I suspect what will happen is the compliance process will catch up with some of these people there in future, 6 months' time or something. There might be a review. And
I did have anecdotal evidence of some of the grants last year where there was a requirement to employ on a couple of these grants last year, and people that they had the work cover registration in place, but they never registered for their pay-as-you-go withholding. And I have heard anecdotal evidence of people trying to backdate, and now the government, they know about it, so that's why they're clamping down on it this time. Yeah. You need to have an ABN on the 28th of July 2021. That's normally in line with your GST. You need to be registered with the federal or state regulator. So if your company registered with ASIC is a good example of that. There's additional criteria for employing businesses. So these last two are only if you're employing. You need to be registered with WorkSafe for your work cover. As part of the application process, they are asking for work cover numbers and details. You definitely need to be registered for work cover if you're an employing entity. And if you're employing, you also need to attest as part of the application form that you're supporting your workers to access any paid leave entitlements, or that if they can work from home, that they are continuing to work from home where possible. Okay, so this is going into the reduction of turnover a little bit more. So this it's going over some of what I said earlier, that there needs to be at least a 70% 2-week decline in turnover compared to a benchmark period 2 years ago. I think what this slide adds, in addition to what I've mentioned before, is for businesses that weren't trading 2 years ago. That's a not to worry. There are alternative periods available depending on when you first started trading. A good example of that is I'm seeing a few that are eligible to look at the period, a two-week comparative period from 1 February 2021 to 28th of July 2021. But if you are in this scenario, I recommend that you do get advice on it, because depending on the date that you started trading, if it was before March last year when COVID first started, what is available there to you is slightly different. So if you are in that situation, I highly recommend that you do get advice or look at the regulations here, because the calculation, the comparison period, you do have multiple options there for you depending on when you first started trading. Okay, so this is the formula that I've been using when I'm doing Excel sheets or when Xero's doing the calculation for you. So this is basically, again, saying the minimum 2-week period. It needs to be a consecutive period. So you can't say a week in May and then a week in July. It has to be the same 2-week period in a row. It doesn't have to be from a Monday to Sunday. It could be from a Wednesday to a Tuesday. Day doesn't matter as long as it's after the 27th of May. And then that's the formula there. If the drop's more than 70%, then you're eligible.
A question we have from one of our attendees is, are there any new grants to start a small business at the moment?
No.
Anything that's any incentives to commence business?
No, nothing. Unfortunately, nothing at all on that front at the minute. It's all been about trying, well, I guess would be the nice way of putting it, band-aid fixes on existing businesses at the moment. There
is an existing grant regime even prior to even COVID occurring last year, and the generic ones that are provided are around business startup costs and business plans and things of that nature. And often they involve third-party consultants coming and assisting in your business. But yeah, likewise, I'm not aware of anything that's new that's been released in the most recent period to encourage small business.
Correct. They have allowed for businesses that started last year to come on and get this grant, because this is obviously a new circumstance, but for ones that have only just starting up now, they haven't really provided anything new in that area.
Another question we have from one of our attendees is, their business spans both Queensland and Victoria, so it's essentially not an entirely national business, but a business across at least 2 states. Do we need to look across the whole business or just the Victorian element of sales when we're comparing a drop in turnover?
Good question. First time I've actually had this question. I dare say from what I've seen, it might be the total sales, but I would highly recommend that you get in contact with us on that one, and we can have a look at that one for you.
One thing to note around the the grants that are often released is they're done quite hastily, and we saw this with JobKeeper last year, where the rules often don't contemplate specific circumstances. We know with JobKeeper last year there was certain exceptions which were ultimately provided with alternative tests, but yeah, at this stage we don't really know of any particular differences that exist there. Another question we have from one of our attendees is, what happens with the new extension in lockdown if it's accepted?
Yeah. What I'm probably crystal balling here a little bit. We were having a bit of a chat about this earlier. So far, what we've seen, there was another grant that was available a few months ago, and more often than not, they're following the same patterns. I can't guarantee what I'm going to say is right. But what they have done with the previous grant that was available was very limited in terms of who could apply for it. You had to be in certain industries. Is as soon as lockdown extensions had occurred, within about 2 days, they started automatically offering additional assistance to those businesses that were already on that grant. I dare say that might be what will happen here.
Because what you're suggesting is that it might be administratively easier, and it's actually a really important point you're making. It might be administratively easier for a state government, for instance, to continue providing grants to people who are already receiving grants.
That's correct. That's correct.
My view is I don't believe they've got the infrastructure to run these grant programs continuously. So what we're talking about by default then is that if you can, as a business, get the grant now, because you might then get future grants just on the basis of your received past grants.
A good example with this one, probably to provide a little bit more comfort around it, is this grant originally was $10,000 when they first announced it. And then the lockdowns extended even further after they announced this a bit over a month ago, and it took a while for it to come out for applications. But because of the extension even further, they increased it to 14,000. So there is precedent there on this. So definitely apply for this one, and there's definitely precedent for potential further grant monies to flow as well.
Yeah, as a general sort of observation, it's really hard to know where the future might lie when it comes to further government grants. But one thing I have noticed is that the appetite, both federal and state, to continue to provide funding for locked down communities, it's dissipating. I think we're seeing less and less urge to fund these sort of circumstances. So I sort of question where we're going to go with it, but time will tell. The next grant, Leigh, the Small Business Digital Adaptation Program grant.
Yeah, this is one that I've seen a little bit of interest in it. I don't think this one's as well known. So I thought I'd put this one in here in case anyone's looking for a little bit of new technology for their business and have been holding it off for a little while. So this is a grant. It's been around for about a bit over a year now. It was supposed to end on the 30th of June 2021, but they've just recently extended it until the 5th of December. This is for a small amount of business products. So there's about 14 on the list, which I'll go through in a second. But as part of this, you are able to apply to be a part of this program, go out and buy the program or buy a subscription to one of these programs, and they'll reimburse you up to either 12 months of the subscription costs or up to $1,200 if you're successful in this. If you're lucky enough to get on the accommodation scheme, the mechanics of this are fairly similar to the regional accommodation schemes that were available and everyone was rushing for earlier in the year, late last year as well. So very, very similar, just business software rather than accommodation. The eligible products must be a new product that you're not currently using in the business. So it can't be something that you're already using and you want to get a rebate for it. Unfortunately, that's a no in this case. It can be an upgrade of an existing product with additional product features. A good example that I have, definitely in our space, is clients that are on MyOb. Some of you may still be on legacy systems from before they went online. You can upgrade if you have a need to upgrade from a legacy MyOb system to the current online version of MyOb. You are able to do this with this grant. Another item that we've put there on the slide, which is a good example, is if you have a website and you want to start trading online, you can integrate one of these e-commerce sites into your system. So there's a list there. Unfortunately, they've gone relatively small with it, so it's only in very specific circumstances. The ones that I have seen that have taken this up so far have been in the accounting space, where they've wanted to upgrade their accounting software to a new version of MyOb.
Leigh, does it apply to even a business? Like we had a question earlier around startup businesses. So if you've started up a business in the past 3 months, say, and you have no accounting system, does it support that kind of initiative?
Unfortunately, not on that one. There is a clause in there, which I think I quickly went over on the last slide, that you had to actually be registered as a business. And off the top of my head, it was September 19 off the top of my head. Okay. So it's about 2 years ago now. So unfortunately, again, not for new businesses again, but you had to be trading back in 2019 to get this grant.
Another question we've got is just around the grants in general. What's the easiest way to access the grant applications themselves? How would our clients get onto the actual application process?
Yeah, so these two, so the first two that we've looked at here, these are available through Business Victoria. So as part of this, we might be able to send out the website, Nick, as well, but these are available through Business Victoria and their website. So there's no manual forms for these. They're all electronic and online. But if you go to the Business Victoria website, the full guidelines are there, as well as the online application forms.
Yeah. I have a question from someone in the building industry. They've asked about a program called Build Exact. I have heard of Build Exact before. Yeah. They're asking if that's part of this package.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Unfortunately, they hadn't applied to be part of these programs. The Build Exact's not on there. The only ones in your industry really are the accounting packages and ServiceMate and Trade Track at the moment.
Yeah. Another question we have is the incentive here for an accounting package specifically, or a list of specific products?
Yeah, this one's a list of specific products. So these are the providers. So if you're using one of these providers, then you may be eligible for it. But if you're outside these providers, then there's no assistance for those ones. So when this first came online, the government had opened it up to these suppliers to apply to be a part of this program. Unfortunately, it only came down to 14 suppliers in the end, so it's been fairly limited. But yes, if you're outside this list of suppliers, unfortunately, they're not eligible.
Yeah. Another question we have is regarding the nature of paying zero fees. Someone might be on zero, but they're paying monthly, which is the most common way of paying zero. Does it apply to people who pay in a monthly?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So very similar to the accommodation programs, you need to sign up for the grant first and be accepted. And then what they do when you start paying the subscription, you upload the receipts for the invoices for your subscription. Xero put these out once a month for you and send them to you via email. Then you upload them to you, and then they'll reimburse you for the subscription cost. So you pay for it, upload the invoice, and then get a reimbursement for it.
Excellent. The SME recovery loan schemes. This is one that was announced rather recently, about a week and a half ago.
Yeah, correct. This is one, it's kind of been about in different guises for the last 12 months, but they've changed it now to try and make it a little bit more attractive to people. These ones you have to apply through the banks. The banks weren't really interested in the old scheme because the government guarantee was a lot lower than it is now. It's now 80%. I'm assuming that's an enticement to get the banks to come on board and actually get on this scheme now, because a lot of the feedback that I did have through mortgage brokers and banks is that not many people were taking this up before. So it'll be interesting to see how that changes. This gives the banks some certainty with a few different terms as far as repayment holidays and guarantees for secured or unsecured loans here. So it's for a broad use of business purposes. It can be used to support investment. It doesn't have to be used to prop up your business because COVID's making you struggle. It can be used for other reasons to actually prop up your business and expand.
When I sort of try to get my head around or try to understand what the intention here of this kind of program is, without getting too complex, I think the government has two ways of incentivizing businesses to do things out there. One is what they call fiscal policy, so that's things like grants and providing direct money to the economy. The other way is monetary policy, and that's essentially providing more credit at a cheaper rate to business owners. This one falls into that monetary policy category. And what it is for me is I think the federal government's trying hard to give people funds and encourage, they don't want to give funds directly to people anymore, which is fiscal, but they want to do it indirectly, which is monetary. So they're trying to get the banks to give you as a business owner more money. I appreciate the difficulty of being a business owner, and that is sometimes you don't want to borrow more money. But unfortunately, I think what the federal government's trying to say in a way is that we want to encourage you to do things as a business, but you're going to have to take on some commercial risk, and that is take on a bank loan or some form of bank funding with obligations. So my recommendation to anyone on this participating in this webinar is that I would, if you're interested in taking on more money to expand, which is a good way of expanding a business, I'd ask your bank some serious questions around this program. We don't really know how serious this program is. The only way to test that is to ask your bank manager what incentives they're offering to get this kind of thing in place. Because as Leigh mentioned, I think last time it was very underwhelming. This time last year, the loan scheme, I can't think of many people who actually took it up. There was very few who did, and the loan sizes were not large, a couple of $100,000 at best. So has anything changed much here, Leigh, from this current incentive program to what they had last year?
I think the main one is the government guarantee with the banks. So the government weren't guaranteeing anywhere near as much of the loan balance here, whereas now they've upped it to 80%. So I think that the government are trying to give the banks the carrot here to actually go ahead and get the funds out. I think that's really the big change here. The other thing here is I vaguely remember that there was a limit on turnover with the old scheme as well. I think it was a $10 million limit, and I think they've now upped that. I can't remember
it's much more generous now from memory.
Much more generous. Yeah.
The question we've got is how long will the SME recovery loan scheme be in place for? Particular clients considering expanding the business further next year.
Actually, to be honest, I actually don't know the answer to that one, Nick. I haven't seen any dates floating around on that one yet. Because
I don't think there was any closure dates, not from what I seem to recall. If you're wanting to apply for this loan next year, it's difficult to say, but I guess what we can say for certainty is that the economic consequences of our current predicament are probably going to be felt for quite a long time. So I wouldn't expect that this scheme would end anytime soon.
Correct. I
don't recall the other scheme ever officially ending either. The original.
No, it never did.
The loan scheme.
Yeah.
So we'd probably almost call this an expansion of the old scheme. Excellent. So moving along now to commercial tenancy relief.
Yeah. So this one's a new one available. They've only really announced it they announced it about a month ago, but we're starting to see a bit more detail in the last week and a half. I'll do the tenant side first. I'll come to the landlords in a second. So let's go through the tenant side first. So this is for rental relief for businesses that have experienced a loss of turnover of more than 30%. Calculated somewhat similarly to the 14,000 grant that we discussed earlier, but there's a few minor changes to this, which I'll go through in a second. This one's not an application form. So this one you don't go through Business Victoria like the other ones that we discussed earlier. There's no application process available here. This one you need to go directly to your landlord and negotiate. If the landlord doesn't come to the party, there is an arbitration process. I haven't seen anyone use it at this stage. Hopefully everyone negotiates in good faith, but there is an arbitration process if it gets nasty. But at the moment, it's a negotiation between tenant and landlord for this. The eligible rent relief for the tenants is calculated by comparing. This has actually changed since we put these slides, so I'll go into a little bit more detail. So it's basically the calculation now is basically you've got to look at a 3 months period. But this started on, originally it was from the 1st of April to the 30th of June, 2021, compared to the same 3 month period 2 years ago. But because the lockdowns have extended, they've now changed the calculation to be any 3 consecutive 3 month period between the 1st of April and the 30th of September 2021. So based on GST turnover compared to the same 3 month period in 2019. So somewhat similar to that calculation that we went through with the earlier grant, but over a 3 month period based on GST turnover. But you're allowed to select any 3 month period. Now, if you started trading after 2019, there is an alternative test for this as well. It's quite long and prescriptive, this one, so I won't go in complete detail on this one. But the calculation is different depending on if you started the business before March last year, so before the pandemic began, or if you started after March last year. So if you are in that category, again, get advice. There's a bit of a 2-page explainer on the guidelines of this one on how to calculate all those alternative tests if you don't fall into if you weren't trading in 2019. With this one, yeah, perfect. Thank you, Nick, for this one. It's a one-time test. You only have to test it once only, and then you're eligible for these incentives until the 15th of May next year. You can also backdate it as well to when the scheme first started.
So if presumably a business was to meet the tests, they're able to negotiate tenancy relief, but their sales recover, let's say over Christmas time, things open up, hopefully they do, and they recover,
you're locked in until January. Relief. Yeah, you're locked in until January. So if things do improve, there's no need to stop until the end of the scheme. It's there as a bit of a safeguard for tenants. There is incentives to landlords for this, which I'll get to in a minute. So how much relief can you get? So it depends on the reduction in turnover on this one. So say, I'll give a couple of examples just to clarify it. So say if you meet the 30% test and you bang on the 30%, you're able to go to your landlord and ask for a 30% reduction in rent. Of that, 50% needs to be waived in full, and the remainder of it can be deferred until next year. So at least 50% needs to be waived. They can waive if the landlord's nice. I'm not saying that they are or aren't. They can waive more than 50% if they like, but it has to be a minimum of 50% that is waived of the 30%. So
it's fair to say that these are minimum guidelines, aren't they? So that a landlord might be incentivized to provide more incentive, and that's probably going to be based upon commercial realities. If a landlord feels as though they really value that tenant cash flow, and they might want to give more incentive to keep that business going, with the view that maybe it could be hard at the moment to find a replacement tenant. or
Correct.
near impossible for some particular tenancies.
Correct. Anecdotally, I have heard of that already, where people have given 50% complete write-offs of rent rather than the smaller percentage, just to keep the tenant in and keep them happy and keep the relationship going. So
I guess the alternative is, if a landlord wasn't to provide the minimum that's under this guideline, that's when we have the dispute resolution aspect of
correct.
provisions.
Correct. At the moment, I think this is kind of on the side of tenants more than landlords, and I'll get to the reason why I think of that in a second. But I can see it the other way around, where you want to try and keep the tenant in there because there's not many people looking for commercial rental properties at the minute. So sometimes you've got to give them that little bit extra at the moment to keep everyone happy. Okay. My other example, I'll just to clarify, if the reduction in turnover is, say, 60%, then it's in line with that. So then you would have 60% that is eligible under this scheme. Half of that, so 30%, would have to be waived, and 30% can be deferred. So that's just to clarify. That's just to clarify any ambiguity there with different percentages.
Excellent.
Yeah. Landlords. Before you go on to the next slide, landlords. So landlords, their incentive here is through land tax relief. At the moment, there's no formal guidelines available. As of this morning, I have been keeping an eye on it. We are expecting them out in the next week or so, especially with the tenant side now in place. But there'll be a reduction in land tax available for landlords through the State Revenue Office of up to 25%. We are still awaiting guidelines on that, however, but we should have that in the next week or so.
Excellent. And our final piece is on the COVID-19 disaster payment paid from Centrelink and the federal authorities.
Yeah, correct. I've seen a bit of interest around this one as well. There were some fairly tight restrictions on this one to begin with, but they've changed the rules because the extensions in the lockdowns continuing. They have actually made this a lot easier to go for now than when they first originally announced it. See if you heard in the news that there was a $10,000 liquid assets rule. That's abolished. That no longer exists. There's no restriction based on liquid assets. The payment is basically there if you're for employees that haven't been getting their hours and haven't been receiving leave entitlements, so no annual leave, sick leave, or anything like that. You can have annual leave and not get it paid out and be on this scheme. So I've seen quite a few people that have had annual leave not take the annual leave and go without no pay for the employer and go for this grant instead. So the main criteria for this is that you need to have lost at least 8 hours of work or a full day's worth of work in any given week. The payment is for a minimum of $450. It's $750 though if you've lost more than 20 hours of work in a week. So from what I've seen so far, I've seen the application process. So for this one, it's very similar to a lot of other Centrelink payments these days. You need to go to the Centrelink website, log in using your MyGov ID or register for a MyGov ID if you don't have one. Do the application form. You need to do it in the week that you lose these hours because they're not back paying this. So it's important that if you do lose the work that you get onto this as soon as you can.
What I find interesting about this is that the payment rate is almost the same as the JobKeeper scheme that we had previously, but there's actually no test for the employer to meet as to whether they've had a drop in turnover. So correct. Technically, it's actually more generous than JobKeeper, which I think is interesting. I don't know if it's been picked up out there in the wider community, but it's potentially more generous than JobKeeper from the point of view that a business might be only marginally affected by coronavirus and the lockdowns, but they might have stood down their staff for a whole multitude of reasons, including just general poor trade. And those staff might still be eligible for all this funding that wouldn't have happened otherwise.
Well, yeah, right on that. Something additional to that is that the original JobKeeper was ironically the $750 a week, but the difference with this one is that was $750 a week less income tax, whereas this grant here is completely tax-free. So these funds received are not taxable income at all. So it's actually, in dollar terms for the employees, it's more generous than the original system.
Correct. I think JobKeeper has certainly benefited the employer to a significant extent.
Yeah.
But this seems to be benefiting the employee much more proportionately.
Yeah. Correct.
But by default, if your employee is benefiting from a government amount and they're still on your payroll in effect, it's sort of an indirect win for both business and employee. So I guess what my message is that if you're an employer, I wouldn't ignore this incentive, because some of your employees might have had a reduction in hours, but might not yet fully understand the benefits they can get. So I'd actually work collectively with your employees to help them understand that, okay, your hours have dropped by, let's call it 10 hours. What does this mean for you? How can I help you to apply for this? Because some of them just might not know what their entitlements are at the moment.
Correct. I've had quite a few employers calling me up and asking for links and all the information for this. So it's definitely quite common out there that the employers are handing on this information to their employees to keep them happy.
We have a question regarding the reason for the loss of hours. So the question is, can the lost hours be because the employee can't work due to caring for children at home due to a lockdown, for instance?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're unable to work for that 8 hours and you've lost the work for borderline any reason due to COVID.
That's really any reason, whether it's lawful stand down from the employer, just loss of work, or a personal reason like having to care for family members, children, whatever that might be, or even just get those sort of circumstances. I mean, the line sort of gets blurred with, for instance, personal leave or sick leave, isn't it? I mean, I'm guessing it's probably more about the fact that your employers had to direct you to not work because of the circumstances. Something we'd have to have a closer look at in a specific instance, I imagine.
Correct. Something that's important to point out as well, especially if there's anyone interstate, is that these rules actually do differ from state to state. Even though it's run through Centrelink and it's a federal program, it is different for state to state. So New South Wales and Victoria are fairly similar, but other states do have different rules. So if you are in a state other than Victoria and New South Wales, there's a lot higher restrictions on being able to get this payment. So if you are in Queensland in a snap lockdown, or in South Australia where they've had them as well, or even Perth, highly recommend that you get advice on this one separately, because there are different rules in those states at the moment.
Great. And the final question we have, so we'll wrap it up shortly, is there an end date for this particular payment? Is the government proposing to stop paying this at any particular point?
At present, so basically as part of their rules on this, there's no actual stop date on it, but it's linked in relation to lockdowns. So whilst the lockdowns are still occurring and people are still inconvenienced by them, this will keep going. Once the lockdowns stop, whenever that might be, then of course I expect that this will cease. But at the moment, there's no specific date on it, but merely a clause about lockdowns on it.
Well, thank you, Leigh. Thanks for your presentation today. It's been great to get some more information out there to our clients, and thank you to everyone who's attended today. If you have any further questions, please feel free to contact Leigh, myself, or anyone else at Wilson Pateras. Hope to see you all again soon. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.